I went to visit my daughter after the accident, and by chance, I overheard my son-in-law say, "You're a burden now, get out of here." Then he tossed my girl's suitcase outside, even though she was still in her wheelchair. A month later, when the truth came out, he begged my daughter for forgiveness. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I was sitting in the sewing workshop, my hands aching from pushing the needle through the silk fabric over and over. When the phone rang, I jumped because I hardly ever get calls at this hour. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, and my heart sank. The nurse's voice on the other end was gentle but rushed. "Mrs. Eleanor, Isabel has been discharged, but no one has come to pick her up." I froze. The needle dropped from my hand, hitting the floor with a tiny sound that echoed in my head. No one came for her. Where is Robert? My son-in-law. I left the half-sewn fabric, grabbed my old purse, and ran out to the street to catch the first bus to the hospital. On the way, I called Robert again and again. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. I squeezed my old cell phone hard, feeling the anxiety rise like a wave. Robert, the man I trusted my daughter to, where was he now? Was he so busy that he couldn't pick up his wife after so many months in the hospital? I looked out the window. The familiar streets of the town passed one after another, but everything looked gray. Arriving at the hospital, I almost ran to the recovery area. A young nurse guided me to Isabel's room. When the door opened, I saw her sitting in a wheelchair, thinner, with an empty gaze fixed on the window. Her long, bright hair was now dry, pulled back in a messy bun. I knelt in front of her and took her hands. They were cold, lifeless. "Mommy is here, my love," I whispered, holding back tears. Isabel barely nodded without taking her eyes off the window where the dry branches swayed in the wind. I didn't dare ask her anything. I just completed the discharge paperwork in silence. The kind nurse helped me push the chair to the taxi. She handed me a bag of medications and gave me several instructions. I nodded gratefully, though my mind was already elsewhere. Isabel and Robert's house. I took a cab to take us home at 2 bench. Throughout the ride, my daughter didn't say a single word. She only looked out the window. When the taxi stopped in front of the little house she and her husband had built with so much pride, I instantly felt something was wrong. The front lawn, where Isabel lovingly cared for her rose bushes, was overgrown with weeds with no trace of flowers. The front door was ajar as if no one cared to close it. I pushed Isabel's wheelchair inside. The wheels squeaked on the wooden floor. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. The wedding photos that used to hang on the wall were gone. Only the nails remained, marking the emptiness. My heart tightened into a knot. This was no longer the warm home I remembered. "Stay here for a moment. I'll go to the kitchen and make you something to eat," I said, trying to keep my words gentle. I positioned the chair near the living room window where she could see the garden, even though nothing pretty was left in it now. Isabel only nodded, her hands limp on her legs. I walked to the kitchen, hoping to find something to make her a hot soup, but opening the refrigerator, I only saw a few cans of beer, some rotten food, and an almost empty bottle of soy sauce. Not a single tomato, not an onion. I stood still, my hand on the refrigerator door, and a feeling of helplessness washed over me. What had Robert done to this house? How could he let it get to this point? Just then, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Robert appeared, dressed elegantly as if going to a party, in a gleaming black suit with carefully combed hair, but his gaze was cold, without a hint of emotion. He glanced at Isabel in the wheelchair, then looked at me without saying a word. I tried to stay calm and asked, "Robert, why didn't you go to the hospital to pick up Isabel? Why is the house like this?" He shrugged and answered in a flat voice, as if talking about the weather. "I was busy." Just 2 short, sharp words, like a stab straight to the heart. I didn't get a chance to respond when Robert took a step towards Isabel. He stared at her with a contempt I had never seen before. "You're a burden now," he said in an icy voice. "Get out of here." I was paralyzed, feeling my blood run cold. Before I could react, Robert went to the bedroom. A few seconds later, he returned, dragging an old suitcase that was clearly already packed. He yanked open the front door and threw the suitcase onto the porch steps. The dry thud echoed, and some of Isabel's personal belongings scattered on the ground. I saw the blue wool scarf that I myself had knitted for her, lying in the dirt. I felt my heart clench. Robert turned, pointed to the door, and roared, "Old woman, take her right now!" I positioned myself in front of Isabel's wheelchair, trying to keep my voice steady. "Robert, you can't do this to her. She's your wife. You promised to take care of her." But he just let out a dry laugh and pulled out his phone and raising it as if it were a weapon. "If you don't leave, I'll call security to have her removed for private property trespass," he threatened spitefully. I looked into his eyes, searching for some trace of the son-in-law I once loved and trusted. But in front of me there was only a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I turned to Isabel. I gently placed my coat over her shoulders. She remained silent, her eyes full of tears, but not crying. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat closed up. I could only grip the chair handles tightly and push her out of that house. The wheels passed over the discarded suitcase, producing a sharp screech, as if it were my own heart breaking. Crossing the gate, the door behind us slammed shut, the sound echoing in the still evening air. I pushed Isabel's chair down the familiar street, my heart heavy as if carrying a huge stone. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I couldn't let my daughter suffer any longer. Every turn of the wheels on the sidewalk sounded like a painful heartbeat, reminding me of what had just happened. Isabel was still silent in the chair, but I noticed her shoulders trembling. And then, as if all the accumulated pain had finally reached her, tears began to slide down her cheeks. She didn't cry loudly or scream. She simply let the tears fall, as if she no longer had the strength to resist. I stopped at a small park by the side of the road, where old trees shaded a worn wooden bench. I pushed the chair there, sat beside her, and took a tissue from my purse to wipe the tears from my daughter's pale face. "My love, don't cry," I whispered, my voice breaking. I offered her a small bottle of water I had in my bag, but Isabel only took it without drinking, her gaze lost among the tree branches. I looked at my daughter and felt a knot in my chest. Isabel had been a radiant girl, always smiling, always bringing light wherever she went. I still remember her wedding with total clarity. The small-town church glowed with sunlight filtering through the colored stained glass, drawing sparkles on the stone floor. Isabel was dazzling in her white dress, a dress I had modified myself over entire nights, embroidering all my love and hope into every stitch. Robert was by her side, holding her hand, his gaze full of love. During the reception, he stood up in front of everyone, his voice firm and sure. "I promise to be Isabel's feet when she is tired, her hands when she feels weak. I will take care of her for the rest of my life." Those words made everyone applaud, and I, sitting in the front row, cried tears of happiness. I truly believed I had given my daughter to a good man, someone who would protect her forever. Now those promises were nothing more than a bitter mockery, a cruel joke of fate. I took Isabel's hand. It was ice cold, lifeless. "Mommy," she whispered weakly, "what did I do wrong for him to treat me like this?" Her question was like another stab in my heart. I could only squeeze her hand hard and tell her, "You didn't do anything wrong, Isabel. Mommy is here. She will always be here." She looked at me with a mix of confusion and pain, as if searching for an answer she herself didn't understand. After a long silence, I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Let's go home, daughter," I said with a certainty I didn't feel. Isabel looked up, still lost. "Home?" she asked, as if that word no longer held meaning for her. I nodded with a forced smile. "Mommy's house, the family's old sewing workshop, is the only place that is still our home." I knew that there, in that humble little house, I could protect her, give her a refuge to heal the wounds Robert had left. I called a special taxi, one with enough space for a wheelchair. The driver, a very kind middle-aged man, helped me get Isabel in and inquired about her health as the car drove off. Isabel rested her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes. Exhausted, seeing her asleep, I couldn't help but remember when she was a child, running through the workshop, playing with the colorful spools of thread, laughing out loud when she knocked over a box full of needles. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to make the most beautiful wedding dress in the world," she would say, wrapping herself in a piece of fabric as if it were a veil. I would laugh, stroke her hair, and think that her life would always be full of joy. Now, seeing her sleep on my shoulder, I only wish she could regain even a little bit of that light she once had. The taxi stopped in front of the workshop when it was already dark. The small house was hidden at the end of the street. The padlock squeaked when I opened it. Inside, the smell of dust and old wood enveloped me. But for me, it was the smell of safety, of hard but warm days. With effort, I pushed Isabel's chair up the stairs. Each step was a battle for my tired hands. The small apartment upstairs was still the same. The wooden table with a broken corner, the sofa with worn fabric, and the simple bed where Isabel slept when she came to visit me. Everything was covered by a thin layer of dust, but it still felt cozy. It was still our refuge. I made up the bed for Isabel and put the old wool blanket I knitted for her when she was a child on top. "Mommy, am I bothering you?" she suddenly asked in a voice so soft I barely heard it. I turned and looked into her eyes. "Bothering me? You are everything to me, Isabel. Without you, I wouldn't know how to go on living." I saw her eyes fill with tears, but she nodded, as if my words gave her some comfort back. I went down to the kitchen and lit the stove to prepare a pot of hot grits. The aroma of rice mixed with a little green onion brought the room to life. I took the bowl of grits to Isabel. I sat by her side and watched her eat slowly, spoonful after spoonful. I knew this was the first meal she had really had after many days. Seeing her savor every bite, I felt a small ray of hope. Although it was just a simple dish, for me it was like a promise that we would overcome everything. When Isabel fell asleep, I sat by her bed and gazed at her face under the faint light of the old table lamp. Although the room was small and everything was worn, I knew this was a safe place, a place where she was loved. I gently stroked her hair and whispered, "We're going to start over, darling. I promise you, we will find happiness again." A week had passed since the day I brought Isabel to the sewing workshop, and both our lives began to take on a new rhythm. Isabel, though still quiet most of the time, had started attempting the physical therapy exercises we found online. Her every small movement, a leg bending with effort, a hand gripping the wheelchair armrest, was an immense act of bravery. I stayed close, pretending to be busy with spools of thread, but really it was to hide the silent tears that sprang up as I watched her struggle with her own body. One afternoon, as golden sunbeams streamed through the window, I was kneeling next to Isabel, helping her stretch her leg according to the instructions on the old phone. A quick knock on the workshop door downstairs startled me. "I'll see who it is. You keep practicing," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm so as not to worry her. I wiped my hands on my apron and went down the creaking wooden stairs. At the door was Mr. Peterson, the owner of the only auto repair shop in the neighborhood, holding a small basket of fruit. He wore his usual worn shirt, a kind smile, but there was unease in his eyes. Mr. Peterson had been a close friend of my husband when he was alive. He was the one who used to carry Isabel on his shoulders, laughing out loud when she got grease on her face from the shop. "Mrs. Eleanor, I came to visit you and your daughter," he said hesitantly, extending the basket to me. "Thank you. Please come in," I replied, forcing a smile, though my heart was heavy. I led him to the small room behind the workshop where there was an old wooden table and a few chairs. I prepared a teapot. The soft mint aroma filled the air, but a tension still floated between us. Mr. Peterson asked about Isabel's health, if she was eating well, if she could sleep, and I answered one by one, but his gaze wandered, as if searching for a way to say something difficult. "Isabel is trying very hard," I said softly. "She's stronger than I imagined, but she still hasn't returned to her old self." After a moment of silence, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and set his cup down on the table. "Mrs. Eleanor, I have something to tell you," he began in a graver tone. "The other day, the neighborhood police asked me to check the security cameras for a purse snatching that happened in front of the shop. I had to review recordings from several weeks back to find the exact moment, and then I saw something by chance." My heart started pounding, sensing something bad. "What is it, Mr. Peterson?" I asked, trying to remain composed. Although my hands were already shaking, he took a deep breath as if needing to gather courage. "It's the recording of the morning Isabel had the accident," he said slowly. "I remember she came to the shop that day to pick up the car, so I reviewed the video to be sure. But before Isabel arrived, a few hours earlier, Robert showed up. I felt my blood run cold." "Robert? What had he done?" Mr. Peterson continued. His voice became graver, filled with concern. "He told one of my employees he was coming to pick up some things his wife had forgotten in the car. Since he was a regular customer, the guy didn't suspect anything and let him into the shop without a problem. But the camera recorded that Robert wasn't picking up anything. He crouched under the car at the front driver's side wheel and used a small tool to do something. He did it very quickly, in less than a minute. Then he closed the car and left as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my hands clutching the edge of the table, feeling the whole world collapse. "And after?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Mr. Peterson looked at me with compassion. 2 hours later, Isabel arrived. She greeted everyone cheerfully, got into the car, and drove away, and you know the rest. The accident on the slope at the end of town. I closed my eyes, trying to contain the pain that burned in my chest. That accident had taken my daughter's legs. It had stolen the light from her eyes. Mr. Peterson placed a small USB flash drive on the table. His voice was hoarse. "I made a copy here. I'm not a cop, Mrs. Eleanor, but I feel like something isn't right. Robert didn't look like he was repairing the car." With a trembling hand, I touched the USB drive as if it might burn me. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I managed in a threat of a voice. He nodded, stood up, and patted my shoulder gently before leaving. "If you need anything, count on me," he said, and walked out, leaving me alone with the memory stick and a storm in my soul. I went upstairs with the USB in my hand, my steps heavy as if carrying the weight of the world. Isabel was sitting in her wheelchair, looking out the window where the sunlight filtered through the branches. I sat next to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Isabel, my daughter," I began, "do you remember that morning when you went to the shop alone to get the car?" Isabel turned to me, her eyes filling with tears, as if that memory still hurt too much. She nodded, her voice choked. "That morning Robert called. He said he had an urgent matter at the company, that he couldn't come back. He asked me to go to the shop to pick up the car, that I should drive it to Grandma's house, and that he would arrive later." His voice sounded so rushed, Mommy. I took her hand. A chill ran down my spine. Isabel's words fit together like the last piece of a puzzle, confirming the most terrible fear. That night, when Isabel was asleep, I sat alone in the corner of the room, in front of the old laptop I almost never used. With trembling hands, I connected the US drive, almost dropping it. The screen lit up, and the blurry image from the security camera appeared. I immediately recognized Robert's figure, the confident way he walked, as if no one could suspect him. He said something to the employee. He waited for him to turn around. Then he crouched under the car, tool in hand, moving with precision. He looked around. He checked that no one was watching. He stood up, closed the car door, and left. Only 1 minute, but that minute changed my daughter's life forever. I watched the video over and over. Every second was like a direct stab to the heart. There were no longer any doubts. This was not an accident. It was a meticulously calculated plan. A trap to end Isabel's life. I tightly gripped the USB drive. A mixture of rage and pain burned inside me, as if consuming me, alive and alive.in. The days after seeing the video Mr. Peterson showed me, I tried to push the horror aside to focus on caring for Isabel, but inside me, the anger and suspicion continued to burn like an unquenchable fire. That morning, the sun streamed softly through the sewing workshop window, illuminating the spools of old thread I was tied in. I tried to concentrate, putting every red, blue, and yellow thread in its place, as if doing so could also organize my thoughts. Isabel was in her wheelchair by the window, embroidering simple stitches onto a piece of fabric with trembling hands. Seeing her effort, the way she struggled with every movement but didn't give up, filled me with deep pain and immense pride. She was fighting, even with small steps, to recover a part of the life that had been stolen from her. Suddenly, the ring of her phone broke the silence. The sharp sound startled me, and a spool of green thread fell to the floor. Isabel looked at me with a slight hesitation, then picked up the phone. She put it on speaker, perhaps because she still didn't have the strength to hold it for long. A feminine, professional, and cold voice spoke from the other side. "Ms. Isabel Rodriguez," she said. "I'm a representative from the Sure Life Insurance Company. I'm calling to confirm some details regarding the life insurance claim filed in your name. Your husband, Mr. Robert Miller, submitted the documents yesterday." I froze as if the whole world had stopped spinning. Isabel looked at me with wide eyes, caught between fear and confusion. She shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. I signaled her to stay silent. I took a deep breath and tried to control the tremor in my voice. "Excuse me, what kind of claim are you referring to?" I asked with forced calmness. "My daughter is still here. She's still alive." The voice on the other side continued, unperturbed. "Yes, ma'am, we know. It is a claim for permanent disability due to an accident. However, we need to verify some data." I felt my heart pound heavily in my chest. Blood rushed to my head. A mixture of fury and horror washed over me. "Could you tell me who is listed as the primary beneficiary on that contract?" I asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. The woman replied with the same coldness. "According to the file, the sole beneficiary in all cases is Mr. Robert Miller, ma'am." My whole world collapsed. I looked at Isabel. She was shaking her head, her eyes full of disbelief. "No, it can't be," she murmured, her voice broken. I asked her to be quiet and replied, "Thank you. I'll call you back later." Hanging up, I felt my strength leave me. My legs were trembling as if my whole body had been drained. I sat next to Isabel. I took her hand, searching for the right words. "Isabel, did you know anything about this insurance policy?" I asked, my voice shaky. She pressed her lips together, her eyes tearful, struggling to remember. "A week before the accident," she whispered, "Robert brought some papers. He said it was a life insurance policy, a gift for our future. He told me that if anything happened, you would be protected. I didn't read the details. He just showed me where to sign. He said everything was already completed. I trusted him, Mommy." I felt a rage explode inside me like a fire consuming all control. "He said I was the beneficiary?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Isabel nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes, I thought he was being thoughtful for the family. I didn't expect—" Her voice broke and I immediately embraced her. I squeezed her tightly as if to protect her from the whole world. But inside me, the pain and betrayal cried out. Robert not only deceived Isabel into signing the contract, but also dared to lie, saying I was the beneficiary when in reality, he was the one who would receive everything. I got up and paced the room, trying to contain the fury. "Mommy, what are you going to do?" Isabel asked, worriedly. I turned and looked into her eyes. "I'm going to investigate him thoroughly, Isabel. I'm not going to let him get away with this so easily." I called the insurance company. I demanded to speak to a manager. After a few minutes of waiting and a man with a deep voice answered, without preamble, I asked for the contract details. He confirmed that if the insured suffered an accident resulting in death, the payout would be enormous, enough to change a whole life. But if the person was left with a permanent disability, the amount would still be considerable, although less. I hung up, my hands and feet freezing cold. Now I understood everything. The accident hadn't been meant to leave Isabel incapacitated. Robert's purpose was to take her life to collect that huge insurance policy. That Isabel was still alive had been an unforeseen flaw in his cruel plan. He kicked her out of the house. He called her a burden only because she had ruined his scheme. He wanted to get rid of her like something worthless. The next morning, as dawn was barely breaking, I left the sewing shop, my heart heavy as a stone. I headed for the old church in the center of town, where the ancient stone walls and stained glass windows always seemed to offer solace. I wanted to see Father Michael, the elderly priest with the gentle smile who had baptized Isabel when she was a baby and also officiated her wedding to Robert. He was the only person I felt could listen without judgment, who could help me find light in the darkness that surrounded me. The church was silent. Only the birds in the small garden outside could be heard. I entered the confessional. I sat on the rigid wooden bench, the screen separating me from Father Michael. I hadn't come to confess, but to unload the weight that was oppressing my soul. I told him everything, from the day Robert threw Isabel out of the house and called her a burden to the video from Mr. Peterson's shop, where I saw him sabotaging my daughter's car. I spoke of the call from the insurance company, of the life policy Robert had tricked Isabel into signing, of his cruel plan to take her life for the gigantic sum. I also didn't hide the dark thoughts that assailed me, the times I wanted to make Robert pay with my own hands, that I wanted him to feel the pain he had caused my daughter. Tears streamed down my face, my voice trembled, but I didn't stop. I had to say it. I needed someone to understand the storm raging inside me. Father Michael listened without interrupting, Only his soft breathing could be heard behind the screen. When I finished speaking, he was silent for a moment, and then his voice resonated, deep and measured. Eleanor, your pain is legitimate. No mother could bear to see her daughter treated this way. But do not let hatred guide you. Hatred will consume you before it reaches your enemy. Let justice do that work. Justice is a fire that purifies, while hatred only leaves ashes. His words were like fresh water falling on my inflamed mind. I stayed there, my hands clutching the edge of my dress, feeling a part of my rage dissipate, leaving room for a new clarity. He continued, his voice soft but firm. You are a strong mother, Eleanor. Use that strength to protect Isabel, to seek justice, not by destroying yourself, but by letting the truth speak for you. I left the church with lighter steps, as if a part of the weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Father Michael's words did not erase the pain, but they clearly showed me the path I needed to follow. I could not let anger guide me or become someone like Robert. Cruel and selfish, I had to fight for Isabel, but do it the right way so that she not only got justice, but also saw in her mother a strong and courageous woman. Arriving at the sewing workshop, I saw Isabel sitting in her wheelchair, embroidering a small flower on a piece of fabric. She looked up when she heard me enter. Her eyes still showed some confusion, but they were brighter than days before. I sat next to her and took her hand. Isabel, I have something to tell you, I began, my voice soft but firm. I know what we are facing is very difficult, but I want us to do the right thing. We are not going to take revenge on Robert his way. We are going to use the truth, the law, to make him pay for what he did. Do you agree with me? Isabel looked at me with tears in her eyes, then nodded. I trust you, Mommy, she whispered, her voice trembling but full of determination. I just want all of this to end, Mommy. The next day, Isabel and I went together to the insurance company office downtown. I pushed her wheelchair along the cobblestone street, silently grateful for the supportive glances of the neighbors who passed by. Everyone had heard what happened to Isabel, and even though they didn't say anything, I knew they were on our side. At the office, I asked to speak directly with the head of the legal department, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. I have proof of the fraud committed by Robert Miller. I want to see all the documents related to my daughter's insurance policy. In the cold white meeting room, smelling of old paper, a middle-aged man in a suit handed us the file Robert had submitted. I turned the pages one by one, my hands trembling. Not only had he requested compensation for Isabel's permanent disability, but he had also attached a falsified medical report stating that my daughter was in a deep coma with a poor prognosis and the possibility of a permanent vegetative state. Those words were like knives stabbing my heart. Isabel, sitting next to me, pressed her lips together, trying to hold back her tears. I gripped her hand tightly, sharing that pain, giving each other courage. The department head pointed to a chain of emails between Robert and the insurance employee. In one of them, when asked why he needed the money so urgently, he wrote, "To cover hospital expenses and prepare for more costly treatments abroad. I will do everything possible to save my wife." That blatant lie made me want to scream. He dared to pretend to be a desperate husband when, in reality, he himself had brought Isabel to this situation. Isabel looked away. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't cry. "Mommy, how can he say something like that?" she whispered, her voice broken. I didn't answer. I just squeezed her hand, silently swearing that I would make him pay for every false word. We left the office with the printed shamas of those fraudulent emails clutched in my hand. I knew that the video from the shop and the insurance documents were still not enough to bring down someone as cunning as Robert. He would find a way to deny everything, to invent stories to cover himself. I needed to know the real reason behind his desperation. Why did he need the money to the point of planning to end his wife's life? Isn't that night, I sat in the small room under the yellowish light that fell over the spools of old thread. I took out all my savings, those coins I had saved for years for emergencies. I called a reputable private detective agents in the big city, the same one Father Michael had recommended to me. When I heard the man's voice on the other end of the line, I spoke firmly. I want to know everything about Robert Miller, every secret, every hidden corner. I need the truth. The next 2 weeks passed in a tense silence, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for an explosion. I spent every day caring for Isabel and working in the sewing workshop, but inside, anxiety consumed me. Every phone ring, every knock on the door made me jump, as if the terrible truth about Robert could erupt at any moment. Isabel, meanwhile, was slowly improving. She began to move her wheelchair around the small attic, maneuvering from the cutting table to the window where the sun's rays streamed in every morning. Sometimes I saw a forced smile on her face, a weak spark amidst so much darkness. These small moments were my biggest reason to keep going. Finally, one afternoon, while helping Isabel with her physical therapy exercises, the phone rang. An unknown number, but I knew immediately it was Mr. Clark, the detective I had hired. "Mrs. Eleanor, we need to meet," he said, his voice grave and concise. "I have what you need, Cafe Esperanza, on the highway at 4 Haute Pinte. I hung up, my heart racing, a mixture of fear and expectation. I looked at Isabel, who was trying to stretch her leg, and I told her, "I'm going out for a bit. Stay resting. Mrs. Doris is downstairs in the workshop. If you need anything, call her." Isabel nodded with a curious look, but didn't ask further. I knew she noticed my tension, but I didn't want to burden her with more worries. Cafe Esperanza was far from town, hidden next to a solitary highway where only the occasional passing of trucks broke the silence. I arrived early, chose a secluded table, and held the hot coffee cup to disguise the trembling of my hands. Mr. Clark entered. A serious-looking middle-aged man dressed in an old coat but with sharp eyes. He placed a thick file on the table without ceremony and began to turn the pages as he spoke. "Robert Miller is not just a failed businessman," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "He embezzled funds from his own company to invest in an illegal real estate network. He thought he would make millions of dollars, but everything collapsed. He lost everything." I reviewed the copies of the promissory notes Mr. Clark handed me. The figures left me stunned. Robert owed a huge sum, not to the bank, but to the people Mr. Clark called the mob. The history of bank movements showed he had been constantly transferring money, trying to cover losses. But he was only sinking deeper. "They have him cornered," Mr. Clark said, pushing a bundle of photos taken from afar toward me. In the images, Robert was being pressed against a dark alley wall by 2 burly men. His face was pale, his eyes full of panic. "These guys don't play around," Mr. Clark continued. "If he doesn't pay, his life is in danger. He needs money, and he needs it now." I looked at the photos and felt a chill run down my spine. But what made my heart stop was when Mr. Clark pushed a small recorder toward me. "This is the recording I got from the device placed near Robert's car," he said, his voice lower. "It was recorded 3 days ago when he went to see his mother, Mrs. Lillian." I put on the headphones. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the device. Robert's voice was heard, full of rage and resentment. "If she were no longer here after the accident, and everything would be easier. A perfect plan, Mom. And now she's still alive, smiling, turned into a useless debt. She's ruining everything for me." Mrs. Lillian's voice answered, sweet, but venomous. "Come on, son. What's done is done. We have to figure out another way. You have to exaggerate her injuries. Say she's close to not surviving. That way the insurance pays more. Listen to your mother." I took off the headphones. My soul was as cold as ice. The pain of Robert's betrayal, though it hurt deeply, did not compare to the disgust of hearing Mrs. Lillian's voice, the woman Isabel called Mother. With all respect, she not only knew about Robert's plan, but she also encouraged him, pushed him to go further. I sat there, the recorder gripped in my hand, feeling everything crumble. "Mrs. Eleanor," Mr. Clark interjected, pulling me out of my daze. "This is what you need, but what do you plan to do with it?" I looked at him, my voice raspy. "I want the truth to be known, Mr. Clark. I want him and her to pay, but not their way. The way of justice." I returned home late at night, my mind blank, as if all emotions had been sucked out of me. Isabel was sitting on the bed, trying to stand up, gripping the edge with trembling hands. Seeing how strong she was, I felt pride and pain simultaneously. She noticed that something in me had changed and looked up to ask, "Mommy, what's wrong?" I sat next to her. I took her hand. I noticed the faint warmth of her thin fingers. "Isabel, I found out more of the truth," I said firmly, despite the internal chaos. "Robert and Mrs. Lillian plan to hurt you together, but I promise you, we are not going to take revenge like them. We are going to bring the truth to light so that this society judges them." Isabel looked at me with tearful eyes, but nodded. I trust you, Mommy, she said, her voice low but resolute. I just want us to be at peace. I hugged her, feeling like I was embracing my whole world. Deep down, I knew the path ahead would have many trials, but with these proofs in hand, I already had the necessary weapons. A week after the meeting with Mr. Clark, I was on the small balcony of the sewing workshop, hanging up some freshly washed fabric scraps. Lost in my thoughts, I was startled by a soft but determined knock on the downstairs workshop door. I hurried to dry my hands on my apron and went down the creaking wooden stairs. At the door was a young woman dressed in a dark blue office suit, but her gaze was full of anguish, as if she carried a burden she couldn't share. "Hello, ma'am," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I'm Lucy. I worked for Robert Miller. Can I talk to you for a moment?" Robert's name immediately put me on guard, but the girl's sincere look calmed me down. "Come in," I said. I opened the door wider and led her to the small room behind the workshop. Lucy sat down, clasping her hands tightly, as if trying to contain her emotions. "I resigned 6 months ago," she began, her voice low but clear. "I was the head of marketing at Robert's company. I know what he's like." She hesitated. She looked at me as if wanting to make sure I wasn't going to turn her away. I nodded, indicating for her to continue. Lucy recounted that she still maintained contact with some former colleagues, and that lately there were rumors about Isabel's tragic accident, and then the rumor that the two had suddenly separated. "I felt uneasy," she said, her eyes showing pain. "I couldn't stand aside when I found out what Robert had done. I needed to tell you." I invited her up to the attic to see Isabel. When she saw my girl leaning with effort against the wall, trying to take small steps with the walking frame, Lucy's eyes filled with both compassion and rage. Isabel looked up, somewhat surprised to see a stranger, but smiled weakly. "Hello," she said softly. Lucy lowered her gaze, as if she didn't dare look directly at Isabel. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you," she said, her voice breaking. "I came because I thought I could help." We sat down, and Lucy began to tell her story. She said that Robert had harassed her and made propositions to her several times while she worked at the company. When she flatly rejected him, he became cruel. He pressured her at work, stole her ideas, and claimed her achievements until she was forced to resign. "He is a demon in the guise of a man," Lucy said, her voice trembling with anger. "I tried to forget it, but hearing about Isabel, I couldn't bear the guilt. If I had spoken sooner, maybe everything would have been different." I took Lucy's hand, feeling the sincerity in her words. "It is not your fault," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But if you want to help, we need it." Isabel, from a corner of the room, nodded, and her gaze brightened slightly. Lucy took a deep breath and said, "Robert is organizing a big party at the Grand Plaza Hotel to celebrate the company's spectacular recovery after the crisis and to present a new project. He invited many important partners in the press. He wants to show himself as a successful businessman, a respectable man." She paused, her eyes gleaming with a bold idea. "It's the perfect setting to unmask him." I felt my heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice slightly shaky with emotion. Lucy explained that a friend of hers on the organizing team had asked her to review the presentation video of the company's achievements that would be screened at the start of the event. "I can change that video," she said softly, but with determination. "We can use the material from the shop, the recordings of Robert and his mother, and also the documents of the insurance fraud. I can edit them into a short video that exposes him in front of everyone." Lucy's idea made me feel both excited and terrified. It was an opportunity to expose the truth, but also a risky gamble. If we failed, Robert could take revenge. I looked at Isabel. My girl was listening intently, her hand and clutching the edge of her dress. "Mommy, I want to do it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I want everyone to know the truth. I don't want to live in fear anymore." Her words gave me strength. "Agreed, Lucy," I told her, looking into her eyes. "We'll do it, but we must be very careful." Throughout the week, Isabel, Lucy, and I worked in secret. Lucy brought her laptop to the sewing workshop and edited the video with impressive precision. We chose the clearest fragments from the security cameras and added subtitles explaining Robert's actions. The recording of his conversation with Mrs. Lillian was integrated into the video, every venomous word sounding like a stab. Finally, we added images of the debt documents and the insurance fraud files, enough to leave anyone breathless. Every night, when Isabel was asleep, Lucy and I checked every detail to avoid mistakes. Mrs. Eleanor, Lucy told me once when we finished the video, I have never seen a mother as strong as you. I smiled, but inside, I only thought of Isabel, my sole source of strength. On the night of the party, Isabel and I stayed home, following the live stream that Lucy sent us. My heart was pounding fiercely. I gripped Isabel's hand with such fear that I was afraid of hurting her. The celebration began in the Grand Plaza Hotel opera room, with bright lights and soft music. Robert took the stage, elegant in his expensive suit, speaking confidently about resilience and business ethics. He even mentioned Isabel, his dear wife recovering from the accident, in a tone so false that I had to clench my teeth. In the front row, Mrs. Lillian smiled with satisfaction, as if she had nothing to be ashamed of. The master of ceremonies went on stage and announced, "And now we invite you to watch the video about the success story of Miller Corp." The lights dimmed and the giant screen lit up. The first few seconds showed the company logo and triumphant music as applause filled the ballroom. But soon the images switched to a blurry black and white video from the workshop's security camera. The whole place fell silent. Everyone held their breath as they watched Robert tampering with the car's brakes. The screen darkened, and then the recording was heard clearly through the speakers. If she were no longer here, everything would be easier. We have to pretend the injuries are more severe. Finally, the documents of the debts with loan sharks and the insurance fraud files appeared on the screen. Cries and murmurs of horror filled the room. Journalists pointed their cameras at Robert. Flashes went off incessantly. He stood motionless for a few seconds, pale, and then, like a cornered animal, he ran toward a table. He smashed a wine bottle against the screen. "Stop it! Who did this?" he yelled, his voice broken by panic. In the front row, Mrs. Lillian collapsed in her seat, fainting. The ballroom descended into chaos. Screams, calls to the guards, the incessant clicking of cameras. I hugged Isabel. We watched the broadcast in silence. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a cold sense of relief. I knew the truth had come to light and that Robert had nowhere left to hide. The next morning, the scandal from Robert's party erupted and spread across all the newspapers and news channels. The images of him out of control, smashing a screen in a fit of rage, were repeated over and over on television. The phone at the sewing workshop wouldn't stop ringing, from curious neighbors to reporters who wanted to interview me. But I didn't answer. I didn't want to get dragged into the whirlwind of public opinion or listen to comments or pity. I only wanted to concentrate on Isabel, on the path to justice we had chosen. I prepared a pot of mint tea. The familiar aroma spread through the air as a small comfort in the midst of the storm. Isabel was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, her gaze fixed on the small television in the corner. The newscast re-aired the scenes of the previous night's chaos, and the anchor's voice sounded excited. The scandal at the Grand Plaza Hotel has revealed the true face of businessman Robert Miller. Isabel didn't say anything. She just tightly clutched the edge of her blouse, a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen since the accident. I placed a hot cup of tea in front of her and smiled softly. "Do you want me to turn off the television?" I asked her. Isabel shook her head and replied in a low but firm voice, "No, Mommy, I want to watch it. I want to know what they're saying." Looking at her, I felt a kind of cold relief wash over my chest. It wasn't satisfaction at seeing Robert exposed, but the certainty that everything was starting to fall into place. He himself had dug his grave, and the truth, like the fire Father Michael spoke of, was beginning to purify everything. I stood up and put on the most elegant black dress I owned, the one I had made for a party many years ago and which now had another meaning. I gathered all the evidence, Mr. Peterson's original USB drive, Mr. Clark, the detective's thick file, and the copies of the fraudulent emails from the insurance company. I carefully stored them in an old leather briefcase, the one my late husband had used. "I'm going out for a moment. I'll be back soon," I told Isabel in a serene voice, although my heart was pounding. She nodded with a look that showed she trusted me completely. I left the sewing workshop and walked directly toward the town's central investigation office. The streets were busier than usual, and the curious glances of people made me feel observed, but I held my head high and kept walking with the firmness of a mother fighting for her daughter. Thanks to the impact of the scandal, I was allowed to see the Chief of Investigations, Mr. Davis, directly, an older man with a sharp but understanding gaze. He had already seen the news and knew what had happened at the party. When I entered his office, he stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm very sorry for what your family has had to go through. Tell me everything." I sat down, took a deep breath, and began to recount everything. I told him about the day Robert kicked Isabel out of the house, the video from the auto repair shop that showed him tampering with the car's brakes, the insurance contract full of blatant lies, and the recording between him and Mrs. Lillian where they planned to falsify my daughter's injuries. I spoke clearly, without letting emotion dominate me, although every word was like an open wound. When I finished, I placed the briefcase on the table and pushed it toward him. "Here is all the evidence," I said in a low but firm voice. "I want justice for my daughter." Mr. Davis turned the pages of the file, examined the USB and the printed emails. He nodded with a severe look. "We will proceed with verification immediately," he said, "and I have ordered the preventive detention of Robert Miller for an urgent investigation. You did well to bring all this to me." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and concern. This was only the first step, but I knew I was on the right path. That afternoon, I returned to the sewing workshop and started cleaning the fabric shelves to keep my hands busy. Isabel was practicing embroidery. Her hands were already more skilled than before, although they still trembled a little. I looked at her, and a mixture of pride and pain filled my chest. While she was concentrated on her work, I heard a car stop in front of the door. Through the window, I saw a luxurious, shiny car that did not fit in the slightest with our small street. My heart sank when I saw Mrs. Lillian getting out. Her haggard face looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. She wore a silk robe, but her frightened eyes and trembling hands betrayed that elegant appearance. She did not enter the workshop. Suddenly, she knelt in front of the threshold, tears streaming down her made-up face. "Eleanor, Isabel," she sobbed, her voice broken. I beg you, please forgive Robert. My son only acted on impulse." Her words left me cold. A surge of anger ran through my body. Impulse? A plan to take my daughter's life. She called it impulse? I wanted to scream in her face, ask her how she could have been complicit in such a crime. But I took a step back, making room for Isabel, my daughter, in her wheelchair. She advanced slowly toward the door. I stayed behind, ready to support her if necessary, but her look told me she wanted to face this herself. She looked directly at Mrs. Lillian, her former mother-in-law, whom she had once respected and loved. Her voice was firm, steady, serene, but cutting. "An impulsive person could never have devised such a calculated and cruel plan, Mrs. Miller. He wanted me gone. I will file for a unilateral divorce, and I'm ready to face him in court." Isabel's words were like a sharp knife cutting short any illusion from Mrs. Lillian. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but only broke into a heartbreaking cry, covering her face with her hands. Isabel maneuvered her chair inside, slowly but with determination. I gently closed the wooden door, without looking back. Outside, a sudden downpour began to fall, and the sound of the rain covered Mrs. Lillian's sobs. I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, feeling that a painful chapter of our lives had just closed. I turned to Isabel, who was looking out the window with a calm but firm expression. "You did very well," I whispered, sitting next to her. "I'm proud of you." The day of the trial dawned with a gray sky and heavy clouds that seemed to weigh down the entire town. I stood in front of the workshop, adjusting my old coat, trying to maintain outer calm. Today was the day we would face Robert, the day to look the truth and the justice I had fought so hard for Isabel in the face. I looked at my daughter sitting in her wheelchair. Her hands were clutching the edge of her skirt, her eyes resolute, but still with a faint trace of fear. "Are you ready?" I asked softly. Isabel nodded and smiled weakly. "I'm ready, Mommy. We will get through this." Her words gave me strength, and I firmly took the chair's handles to push her forward. In front of the courthouse, a crowd of journalists and onlookers had gathered. The sound of cameras and insistent questions made me feel suffocated. Luckily, some kind neighbors, Mrs. Collins from the bakery and Mr. Jones from the general store, came to help me take Isabel through the crowd. They pushed her wheelchair up the steps without saying much. They just patted me on the shoulder, as if trying to encourage me. I nodded gratefully, my heart full of emotion. In the darkest days, it was the people around us who became our true support. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was cold and solemn. The light coming through the tall windows fell on the marble floor, forming pale streaks. I sat in the front row, reserved for witnesses, strongly holding Isabel's ice-cold hand. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand as if seeking a bit of comfort. On the other side of the room, Robert was sitting next to his lawyer, haggard and slumped. The expensive suit that once fit him perfectly now hung on his fragile body. He didn't look up. His gaze was fixed on the table, as if he wanted to escape from everything. A few seats behind, Mrs. Lillian was sitting with an empty face, her eyes swollen from crying so much. Looking at her, I felt no compassion, only a strange sense of emptiness, as if the people who were once Isabel's family were now nothing more than distant shadows. The trial began. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm, cutting voice, stood up and opened with a powerful accusation. The actions of Robert Miller represent the highest betrayal of trust and love. He not only planned to take his wife's life, but also stole her dignity, her future, and her trust for personal gain. His words sounded like hammer blows echoing in the silent room. I felt Isabel squeeze my hand harder, but she didn't look away. Her eyes were fixed on the prosecutor as if she wanted to reinforce every one of his words. The evidence was presented one by one. When the video from Mr. Peterson's shop was projected onto the large screen, a murmur of horror ran through the room. The images showed Robert tampering with the car's brakes with a cold, calculating expression. I felt a shiver run down my body. Robert's defense lawyer lowered his head, unable to raise it, as if he himself knew there was no possible justification. Then they played the recording of the conversation between Robert and Mrs. Lillian. Her venomous voice, "You have to pretend the injuries are more severe," reverberated throughout the room. Lillian burst into tears, but no one showed compassion. The insurance fraud emails, the financial documents, and the loans with loan sharks were read aloud, every word unmasking Robert's miserable intentions. I looked at him. His head was bowed, his hands trembling, covering his face, unable to bear the truth being revealed. When it was Isabel's turn, I thought she would let the prosecutor speak for her, as we had planned. But suddenly, she raised her hand and said in a soft but firm voice, "Your Honor, I want to speak for myself." I froze, watching her advance in her wheelchair to the stand. The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes turned toward her. Isabel raised her head, and in a calm and clear voice she spoke, as if all the pain had transformed into strength. "Robert tricked me into signing the insurance contract," she began without taking her eyes off the judge. "He said it was for our future. For my mother. I believed him. The morning of the accident, he called me. He asked me to go to the shop to pick up the car because he was busy at the company. I listened to him, and then everything changed forever." Isabel did not cry. She did not accuse, she only recounted the facts. But her calmness weighed more heavily than any word of reproach. I was sitting there, tears silently streaming down my cheeks, not from pain, but from pride. My girl, despite everything she had lost, was still so strong. When Isabel finished, the entire room remained silent. Only the sound of the court clerk writing her statement could be heard. Robert's defense lawyer stood up, but only uttered one phrase in a hushed voice. "We have nothing to argue." The judge, an elderly woman with a severe but humane gaze, looked directly at Robert. "Accused Robert Miller," she said in a voice that sounded like an irrefutable sentence, "you not only intentionally attempted to murder your wife, but also took away her dignity, her future, and her trust. That is an unforgivable crime." She paused. She looked toward Mrs. Lillian and continued, "Mrs. Lillian, as an accomplice, you helped cover up this crime, causing incalculable suffering." She struck the gavel and firmly proclaimed, "Robert Miller, guilty of attempted homicide, insurance fraud, and illegal investment, is sentenced to 25 years in prison. Mrs. Lillian, accomplice, is sentenced to 10 years in prison." The entire room seemed to exhale in relief. The murmurs returned to fill the air, but I could only hear the pounding of my own heart. The judge added, "The court also officially approves Ms. Isabel Rodriguez's request for a unilateral divorce, terminating all legal relations between her and the accused Robert Miller." I took Isabel's hand and felt the warmth emanating from her thin fingers. We had done it. Justice had spoken. When the police handcuffed Robert and led him away, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at me. In his gaze, there was no longer arrogance or hatred, only a terrifying emptiness, as if nothing was left inside him. I looked back at him, not with eyes of victory, but with serenity. There was no longer rancor or pain, just a conclusion. Mrs. Lillian led away afterwards, did not say a word. She lowered her head and walked with heavy steps. I pushed Isabel's wheelchair out of the room, leaving behind the dense air and the curious glances. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the gray sky began to let timid rays of sun pass through. Isabel looked up, took a deep breath, and told me, "Mommy, we did it, right?" I smiled, and for the first time in a long time I felt true peace. "That's right, my daughter," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "We did it." 6 months after the trial, the warm sunlight filtered through the workshop window, illuminating the perfectly organized rolls of fabric on the shelves. The constant sound of sewing machines mixed with laughter and conversations, completely replacing the dampness and sadness of before. The small attic that was once our makeshift refuge was now full of life. I stood in a corner, gently cleaning an old sewing machine, while a sense of peace flooded my soul, a peace I never thought I would feel again. Isabel, with the help of a walker, slowly advanced from the cutting table to her own machine. Her steps, though still slow and heavy, were surprisingly firm. Her hands, which once trembled holding a needle, now moved skillfully, threading the needle and sewing secure and precise stitches. Every time I saw her concentrating in front of a piece of fabric, I noticed a spark in her eyes, not the radiant glow of yesteryear, but a quiet light, a silent strength, like a small flame refusing to be extinguished. "Mommy, I think a lace trim on the collar would look good on this blouse," Isabel said, her voice soft but sure. I smiled and nodded. "Good idea, daughter. Do it. I trust you." We worked together to renovate the sewing workshop and turn it into a completely new place. The old walls were painted a light cream color, which made the room look wider. I placed small pots in the window corner where the sunlight came in and made the leaves shine. In front of the workshop, we put up a new wooden sign with the words, "The Hope Sewing Shop," engraved in delicate letters. That name was not a random idea. It was a promise between Isabel and me that we would not allow the dark past to define our future. Every stitch, every thread in this shop carries a story of healing and rebirth. The good news spread quickly. Our story after the trial extended throughout the town and beyond. Newspaper articles, television reports, and neighborhood murmurs turned my daughter and me into a symbol of strength. But what moved me most was not the praise, but the women who began to arrive at the workshop. They didn't just come to learn a trade, but to find a safe place, a place to heal their own wounds. Margaret, a single mother with sadness always reflected in her eyes, had fled home after suffering years of abuse. Araceli, a young woman of only and had a leg disability after a motorcycle accident, but always smiled when she had a needle in her hand. Carmen, an elderly woman abandoned by her own children, found joy sitting with the others, telling her stories while sewing handkerchiefs. They called the workshop home, and for me that was the most valuable gift. One morning, as I taught Margaret how to sew the hem of a dress, a group of people from the local television station unexpectedly appeared at the door. They had come to film a program about inspiring stories and wanted to interview Isabel. I was a little worried that remembering the past could hurt her, but Isabel just smiled and nodded. "Mommy, I want to do it. I want people to know that you can move forward." I stepped aside, watching her prepare, my heart full of pride and nervousness. The interview took place right there in the workshop. Isabel was sitting in a chair, surrounded by women concentrated on their work, and the sound of the sewing machines created a soft melody. The journalist, a young woman with a warm voice, asked her, "Isabel, after everything that happened, the betrayal, the accident, and the darkest days, what helped you move forward and rebuild your life with such strength?" The entire workshop fell silent. All eyes turned to Isabel. She looked out the window where the sunlight danced over the colored threads and smiled. A sincere, quiet smile, as if all the pain had dissolved. "I realize," she said, her voice firm and full of life, "that some storms don't come to destroy us, but to clear the path. They teach us to rebuild our lives stronger and with more meaning. I have my mother, my new friends here, and myself. That is enough." Isabel's words were like a soft breeze that swept through the room. Margaret wiped away her tears. Araceli smiled brightly, and Carmen clapped, laughing. That's our girl. I, from the corner of the workshop, watched my daughter in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks, but with peace in my heart. Isabel's words were not just for the journalists, but for everyone present, and also for me. They reminded me that even if we have gone through the darkest days, the light is always there. We just have to dare to look for it. After the interview, the sewing workshop became even livelier. Many other women began to arrive, bringing their own stories with them. There were days when the workshop was full of laughter, conversations, and also shared tears. We didn't just make clothes. We also stitched together the broken pieces of our lives. Stitch by stitch, thread by thread. Isabel, with her strength, had become a source of inspiration for everyone. That girl who was once called a burden was now the support of many hearts. Every time I saw her teaching Araceli how to hem a blouse or holding Margaret's hand as she talked about her days of pain, I felt my own heart heal a little more. One afternoon, as the golden sunlight streamed through the window, I stood on the balcony looking out onto the small street. Neighbors passed by, waved, and smiled as they mentioned the Hope Workshop. I turned and saw Isabel laughing with Carmen, her hands moving skillfully over the sewing machine. Our story, once a tragedy of betrayal and pain, had become proof that even when life pushes us to the abyss, we can still get up and mend hope with the broken pieces. After everything we went through, I understood that justice does not only come from a court's ruling, but also from the courage that dwells in every person's heart. I once thought that revenge was the only way to protect my daughter, but I discovered that true strength lies in confronting the truth, in daring to walk through the pain without letting hatred consume us. Life can be cruel, people can betray, but when we choose to stand up and defend what is right, darkness cannot win. I want everyone to understand that even if we are betrayed or deeply hurt, we can always find the light. Not through resentment, but through courage and faith in the truth. Because only when we forgive the past does justice become complete and the heart finds peace. The story you just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We tell it not to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story can become a candle that lights the path for another. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.